Hello again everyone, I'm Miss Davis and today we're going to be digging into the kingdom Animalia. This kingdom is a very diverse group and it goes from sponges to worms all the way up to you as humans. All animals do share several characteristics. First, all animals have eukaryotic cells. This means that their cells have a nucleus and various organelles. Next, all animals are multicellular, meaning they're going to be composed of more than one cell. Animals are also considered heterotrophs. Heterotrophs meaning that they are going to actually consume their food. In most cases, they're going to ingest it and take it into some sort of digestive type system. Animals are also motile, meaning that they move during some point of their life. And then last, animals usually carry on sexual reproduction, which means they have a diploid life cycle. A new animal must have two sets of chromosomes. That's where the diploid comes from, one coming from the egg and one coming from the sperm. So now let's take a closer look at this kingdom. So we're going to investigate the phylogenetic tree of animals, and we're going to begin with the invertebrates. Invertebrates are animals that do not have an endoskeleton made of bone or cartilage. A lot of times we'd say they also don't, in other words, they don't have a backbone. The first trait on our tree is being multicellular. Sponges are multicellular, but they do not have true tissues. Tissues are a group of cells that work together for a particular job. They don't have these. Sponges are part of the phylum Porifera, and they are what we call sessile, meaning stationary, filter feeders. They take water in through their pores. Each cell filters out the nutrients and food they need, and then they release the water through the top of the sponge called the osculum. Now, sponges have the ability to reproduce sexually or asexually. The next step on the animal evolutionary tree does include true tissues. Now, tissues, remember, are groups of cells that work together. Now, these create germ layers. We have an endoderm, which is the tissues on the inside. We have a mesoderm, which are tissues in the middle, and then the ectoderm, which are tissues on the outside. We also see a new characteristic called symmetry that comes into play here. Organisms that have radial symmetry are organized like a wheel, and two identical halves can be produced by any longitudinal cut. So you can cut them many ways and each piece will look the same. Organisms with bilateral symmetry, however, have a definite right side and left side. And they can only be cut one way down the center like we see here for you, and it creates a right and a left side. Can't cut yourself any other way to see you have two equal parts. It has to be right down the middle. Now, the next group we want to talk about are the cnidarians. Cnidarians have true tissues, and they display what we call radial symmetry. Now, in the phylum Cnidaria, there are two body forms we want to discuss. First, they can have the body form of a medusa. Medusa is where their body form is like a bell-shaped down. Their tentacles hang down, and their mouth is underneath. This is what you would see with jellyfish and the Portuguese man-of-war. On the other hand, the second body structure is a polyp. Polyp is where they sit up, tentacles up, and mouth is at the top. This is what we see with the sea anemone and corals. Now, cnidarians are very effective predators, and this is because they have specialized stinging cells. These stinging cells are called cnidocytes. Now, with this, they're able to paralyze their prey and then bring it using their tentacles toward their mouth. The next trait is the presence of a body cavity, and this body cavity is called the coelom. Now, acoelomates are animals that do not have a body cavity, and you see this in the picture with the flatworms, acoelomates. If an animal does have a body cavity, but it's not completely lined with mesoderm, we call these pseudocoelomates, or they have a pseudocoelom. It's kind of like a false one. It's not completely formed. Coelomates, however, are the animals that possess a true body cavity that is completely lined in mesoderm. Okay, and in the picture here it shows you a human. Now, this includes many types of animals. Now, during early development in most animals, a hollow ball of cells called a blastula is formed. Now, this blastula will start to fold inward and it creates an opening. This opening is called the blastopore. Now, there's two forms of development that happens here. Protostome development is where that blastopore, that opening, becomes the mouth first. So the first opening in a protostome is the mouth. In deuterostomes, that blastopore becomes the anus. So the first opening made in the deuterostomes is the anus. There are only two groups that are deuterostomes. This is Echinodermata and the chordates, and we'll discuss them a little bit later. Now, the first protostome animals that we want to talk about are also acoelomates. They do not have a true body cavity, and this is what we call platyaminthes. Platyaminthes are the flatworms. Flatworms do have bilateral symmetry. You can cut them down this way and you have a right and a left side. Okay, they also have the beginning of what we call cephalization. This is a head region. Now, they have eye spots that can detect light and dark, and they do have some specialized organ systems like a excretory system with flame cells and a ladder-like nervous system. They are also considered hermaphrodites. This means they contain both male and female reproductive organs. Now, flatworms can be free-living, which means they don't really bother any other types of organisms. They don't make us sick, and that's what you see here with planaria. However, there are many flatworms that do cause diseases, and they are parasites. Up here at the top, you can see we have a tapeworm. Tapeworms are parasites that infect the intestines of animals, and especially humans. Also, we see flukes. Flukes are parasites that get their name based on which organ they inhabit. So you might have blood flukes, liver flukes, bladder flukes, lung flukes, and so on. And so both of these are considered parasite flatworms. Now we're going to stick with the worms as we move through here, and we're just going to discuss the next phylum, which is Nematoda. Nematoda are the roundworms. Roundworms that are non-segmented. They don't have segments. And they can live almost anywhere. Many of them are free-living, but some are parasites to plants and animals. So let's talk about several roundworms that infect humans. One is here in the picture called Ascaris. This is one that infects the intestines of humans. Normally it's going to be related to where sanitary conditions are bad. You'll notice here that there's a male and female, so these are not hermaphrodites like you saw in flatworms. The next one is what we call Trike Enosis. This is another roundworm that can infect the intestines. However, it can make cysts that will also infect your muscles. This can cause achy joints, muscle pain, and itchy type skin. Now, the disease that you see here is elephantitis. Elephantitis is caused by a filarial roundworm. It blocks up the drainage of fluids out of your extremities, and it causes swelling that you see here. Now, all of these roundworms that we've talked about with infections are not very common in the United States. They can happen, but they're not common. There are two, however, that are common. Over here in the picture on the left, you see pinworms. On the right, you can see a picture of hookworms. So these are two that are not life-threatening, but you do see them more often here in the United States. The last group of worms are the annelids. This is the phylum Annelidea. These are the segmented worms. You can notice that they have segments. Now this phylum consists of three groups: the oogocetes, the polycetes, and the leeches. Now earthworms are what we call the oogocetes. They have what we call few setae per segments. Now setae are bristles that anchor the worm or help it move through, say, soil. Polycetes, on the other hand, are the most common type of segmented worm, and they live in marine environments. You'll notice here that they have many setae per segment that you can see here in the picture. Last are the leeches, and leeches don't have any setae, and they are bloodsuckers. Okay, they are unique because they also produce a special chemical when they latch on to suck the blood of an organism that is an anticoagulant, making sure that your blood doesn't clot, and it's also an antiseptic so that you don't necessarily feel the bite as well. The next group we want to talk about are the mollusks. Okay, this is in the phylum Mollusca. Individuals in this phylum are composed of three distinct parts. Okay, they have a foot region. This foot region is used for movement. You can see how a snail would have a foot region. They also have what we call a visceral mass. This is the soft part of their body that contains all their internal organs. Last, they have a mantle. This is the outer covering that protects the visceral mass. In some cases, it's a shell. Now, there are three common groups of mollusks. The first group you see here are called the gastropods. Gastropod means stomach, foot. This includes the snails and the slugs. The cephalopods, meaning head foot, include the octopus, squid, and nautilus. They all have different numbers of tentacles, but you'll also notice that the nautilus is the least advanced and it still has a shell. The last group includes clams, oysters, scallops, and mussels. These all have a two-part shell, therefore their name is called the bivalves. Now, phylum Arthropoda is an extremely diverse group. Arthropoda means jointed appendages, and members here have an exoskeleton made out of chitin, or what we would call chitin. Now, they also show segmentation. However, their segmentation, you'll see here in the picture, is a head region, a thorax, and an abdomen. These members, some of them will also undergo metamorphosis. Metamorphosis means that they'll change shape, going from like a caterpillar to a butterfly. There are several major groups in the phylum Arthropoda. The first are the crustaceans. Crustaceans are marine arthropods, or they live in water. These would be your lobsters, your crabs, and your shrimp. Arachnids include spiders, scorpions, and ticks. The largest group are the insects, and these are the most diverse. These include things like grasshoppers, termites, beetles, flies, butterflies, bees, and the list could go on and on. Now, centipedes and millipedes don't fit into any of these groups, but they're still part of Arthropoda. But what's the difference between the two? Well, centipedes have one pair of legs per segment. They're also carnivorous, meaning they're going to eat other insects, and they're also poisonous. On the other hand, millipedes have two pairs of legs per segment, and they are what we would consider decomposers, so they're not harmful. The last invertebrate group we want to discuss is Echinodermata. This is the first group that does have deuterostome development, meaning that the first opening that develops is the anus. Echinodermata means spiny skin, so these guys have a skin that's kind of spiny. These organisms also have radial symmetry as adults, not bilateral. Everything we have talked about from flatworms up had bilateral symmetry. These guys go back to having radial symmetry as adults. Now, Echinodermata move by using a water vascular system. They suck water in, which then causes a type of hydroskeleton inside their body, which allows them to move. Sea stars, brittle stars, sea cucumbers, sea lilies, sand dollars, and sea urchins are all examples of members of Echinodermata. Now, this concludes our lecture over invertebrates. In our next lecture, we're going to switch gears and still stay in animals, but we'll be focusing more on the vertebrates. So please make sure that you tune into that next lecture as well.